Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dagmar Babi podcast. Today we have Viktor, one of the most amazing people I've discovered on Twitter. Viktor is building an internet search engine from scratch, and we're going to talk about his life, his early childhood, career life, tech journey, why he's building an internet search engine, and so much more. I'm so excited to have this episode with him. I'm very thrilled because this is such an exciting topic for me to learn and to discover. Welcome, Victor.
Hello.
All right, all right. So let's start off just by introducing yourself. Can you introduce yourself to everyone listening?
Yes, that I can. As you mentioned, my name is Viktor. I mostly go online by the alias and domain name Marginalia. I'm a software engineer by vocation and a physicist by education. And as you mentioned, perhaps most well known for an internet search engine that I've built and for a couple of years ran out of PC in my living room. Yes, and that's the important bits.
All right, all right. How old are you and where do you live?
I am 38 years old and I live in the north of Sweden.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood? What kind of kid were you? Did you like tech back then? Can you tell us something about your childhood?
Yes, I have always liked tech. I think when I was really young, I was really like into Legos and so on. But then at some point, my family got a computer. I think I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I was really drawn to that, and almost immediately started exploring programming in QBasic, which shipped with all DOS computers at that time, I think at least. And I did some very crude programming in this language, like drawing circles on the screen and so on, but it was just endlessly appealing to me. I didn't really understand the English language because I was a Swedish kid, but I sort of associated the words I saw on screen with the concepts and managed to still do some programming. And this really just continued throughout my early youth. Eventually got my own computer and fairly quickly installed Linux on it and got into C programming because I was really appealed by the notion of digging into how computers worked, and I wanted the lowest level programming language I could get my hands on. And so I dug into C and back those days, there wasn't really the internet ecosystem around learning that we have today. It was in the early 2000s, like late 90s, something like that. So I learned by going to books and man pages and to some extent, some online resources were available back then, like BJ's guide to process and networking and so on. That stuff is still around and still very valuable. And I actually found them printed. I was moving the other week or a couple of weeks ago and found a bunch of documents I had printed out when I was like 14 years old. And they were like tables of escape codes for the terminal where you could move the cursor or change the color of the text and so on. And that was just really my stuff back then.
Okay.
And I had a string of projects going throughout my teenage years as well.
Okay. Well, is there anyone technical at your family? Maybe your parents or sibling?
I think my father is the closest you would say. He isn't really like an engineer or anything like that, but he has a background in mathematics by education and had some exposures to computers back in the day. And he was the guy who's sort of introduced that side into the family, and I took to it immediately.
Okay. Okay, that's pretty cool. I guess when did you discover programming, and what was the first programming language that you experimented with?
Right. So as I mentioned, I did my first programming in BASIC, and this was at a very young age. But then this was like barely programming. This was mostly like experimenting with basic syntax and so on, getting the computer to do stuff. But I then had some exposure to Java and C and Pascal as well at some point. But this was a couple of years later, so very early.
Okay. So I read that you studied physics, and the way you put it was, I studied physics, but many of the classes were pretty easy, so I had a lot of time to work on coding. And that's actually a pretty interesting statement you just said, because most people don't find physics easy, to be honest. Tell us about that part. Why did you join, why did you decide to learn physics, and where did you learn it?
Well, the background for going toward physics rather than, say, computer science was I was bored a lot in high school, and I really hated that feeling of sitting through classes and understanding stuff already and to move forward. And this is, I think, partly the Swedish education system isn't very good at taking care of people who are relatively smart. So you end up bored instead. And I hated that feeling. So I wanted to like study the hardest thing I could find, basically. This was a bit hubristic, I think, but keep in mind I was like 17, 18 years old when I was thinking this thing. So I basically went for physics because I liked it in high school, because it was challenging, and went into that educational direction in university. And I studied at the local university. And obviously not everything was easy, but there are hard classes in physics, and I always get the best grades either. But enough of them were simple. And I actually did take some like stray classes in computer science as well, but those were so easy that I basically didn't really study for them. And this is a waste of academic time. You shouldn't be doing this. This is like bad advice. Don't follow my guide in that sense. But sometimes I would take like a basic class in systems programming or something, which is something I had been doing since I was like 14 years old at that point, and I knew about fork and sockets and so on. So I basically never showed up, and then I just did the exam. So then I had like a semester where I barely had to do any studying, so I could engage with my programming projects instead. So that's not a very responsible way of living your life, but I don't think I was at that age. I was really into my programming.
Okay. Well, did you pursue more education after that?
After university? Well, no, I basically graduated, and then I decided that, well, during studies, while I was studying, I had some vision of maybe getting a PhD in physics, but I decided against it at some point and figured I wanted to do something else.
Okay. So like back in university, one of the projects you did was a spaceship simulator. Do you recall that project?
Yeah, I recall it because I remember like running back and forth between. I had a class in linear algebra, so I would go to class and I would learn a concept about vector projections or something, and then I would run home and then I would implement it in my basic 3D engine and then keep applying concepts to it. It wasn't a very large or long project, but it really stuck with me and gave me a strong impression that kind of lasts with me today. How good of a way of learning something this is, because like linear algebra really stuck with me because I constantly was applying all the concepts I saw.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. Another project you built was a trinary computer. I don't know what it is. Can you explain what it is?
Right. So the background of trinary computing is, we're using binary computers now, where you have ones and zeros, zeros and ones, that encodes all the states and all the numbers and so on. But there's an alternative track that was a subject of study in Russia during like the 70s, where they built computers that have 3 states instead of 2. So you could have like 1 0 1 and 2, or you can have -1 0 and 1, and encode numbers that way, and build a computer around this concept. And this was just something I found on Wikipedia one day and decided that, hey, I want to explore this, and there wasn't really any interesting way of doing that, so I started building an emulator for a processor based on the 6502 instructions that used this trinary logic. And I did have to apply some like imagination, like how would this actually look if we did this? And like the biggest change is perhaps that you have different logical operations. Like in binary logic, you have and or and not and so on. But in trinary logic, you have an enormous number of operations. I think it's like 729 different operations, because the truth table is so much larger because you have 3 states. like being able to encode those operations, I ended up basically giving them numbers and special instructions for them. So this project really spun out of all proportion. I started building an assembler for it, and then a C compiler, and then like an IDE for the C compiler.
That's insane.
And I had like 5 users, and they were all in Russia.
Oh wow!
but really just my following my interests and building this ridiculous project. Eventually trying because I on the one hand didn't really know how to continue it. I had built like everything I wanted, and then on the other hand I graduated from university and didn't really have the time and energy to spend maintaining this huge project anymore. So it's a bit of a sad end to the project, but at the same time I didn't want to maintain this 5-user project in my entire life either. So
I'm actually curious to know, is the trinary computer any more efficient? Why use a trinary computer, you know?
That's actually a really good question. I don't think they're like so much more efficient, but there are some neat properties of trinary numbers. For example, if you have binary numbers and you want to encode a negative number, then you either end up having a wasted bit, or you have this sort of asymmetry where you can encode smaller, or rather larger by magnitude, numbers that are negative than positive, or vice versa. In trinary, you can actually have, since you have negative digits, you can have negative digits at least. You can encode negative numbers without having any wasted states, without having like a sign bit. You can, the largest digit is just the sign bit, essentially.
Okay. You just got me super curious about that. That's why. Is it actually in use right now? Is there any project in the world that uses a trinary computer, or any project that would be more efficient if it run on a trinary computer?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't think so. But it's such an interesting and appealing concept. So I think people keep revisiting it.
You know what's insane for me? It's once you, like, how do you even get started building this? Like, what language did you even use? You built the language, the ID, the compiler, like, tell us about the process in just, an overview way.
Yeah, this was all in C++. And I think I just started building some functions for operating on these trinary numbers, and I kept improving the algorithms as I went. But and then an instruction set basically to evaluate the CPU instructions, the machine code, and then it sort of just added on top of that. It's actually fairly simple, emulating a processor, at least if you don't have to worry about performance all too much. This was a fairly slow processor. So
okay, I guess after that, at this time you have graduated and you started work, I guess. And can you tell us about the first job you had? If it's programming or not. Tell us about your career and how it started.
Right. So I don't think I have the most interesting career, but it's a bit meandering, at least. My first job is my first programming job, which is basically just the first job I saw when I looked for programming jobs locally. And I didn't really have a sense of direction at that point. So I applied for a job as a software engineer at the IT department of an international bank that had an office in the city I was living in. And that's not a great working environment. Don't work for banks if you can avoid it, or at least if you're getting ridiculously well paid. That's my career advice, at least. But luckily, they actually shut down this office fairly quickly after I joined, like 6 months later, and we were acquired. Like the remains of the office was acquired by something like a fintech startup from Stockholm. Which was a much more rewarding place to work. And I actually stuck with that place for like 8 years or something like that until relatively recently. And this was all in Java, building basically systems for exchanges and clearing houses and so on, doing like the keeping trades going and so on, and in between banks and yeah. So that's basically where I got started and stayed for a long while. And then at some point, they were acquired by NASDAQ, and I decided that no, I don't want to work for a big company again. So I started doing contracting instead, doing like government contracting.
Okay. Is there a reason why you didn't want to work for a big company?
Well, I was a bit burnt by my experience with the investment bank I started out at, and you have like a ton of managers, and there's a lot of bureaucracy, and it's a fairly stressful way of working as well. So I didn't like that. I wanted something more local where, it was possible to talk to the CEO if you had some gripes or something like that. That's much more appealing for me.
Okay. So I guess, have you done any jobs relating your education, in physics? Have you written anything, published anything, done any physical experiments?
Actually, I haven't worked professionally as a physicist at all. But yeah, I went into physics, studied physics, and then I went to work doing programming, basically. But I mean, you still have a benefit from a lot of the stuff you learn as a physicist, at least in mathematics, and that sort of stuff, especially nowadays with all the AI stuff that's been emerging. I have a very, very solid mathematical background as a physicist.
Wow. Okay. Okay. I guess after that, let's talk about Marginalia. First of all, what does it mean? Second of all, when did this start? Can you tell us about the origins of all of this?
Right. So this was during the pandemic. As most people, I spent a lot of time online during the pandemic because we were locked down, and we couldn't go to the office, and we could go outside, but we weren't supposed to. So I spent a lot of time online, and I had a lot of free time on my hands because I didn't have to commute to work. And I basically just started building a website. This was in Swedish at the time. It was just a blog, and I don't know why I named it Marginalia, but I did. And eventually this website started being backed by like a bunch of services that did stuff for me, basically replacing stuff online. I felt frustrating. I thought too much of the web was slow and had ads and was annoying. I started building like replacements for that stuff, for front ends and stuff. And well, this sort of again spiraled. And at one point I decided, actually this thing called Google is frustrating me as well. And I figured, why can't I do something about it? And this was in part because also there was stuff I wasn't able to find on Google. I was really struck with this impression how much the web had changed, how boring it had gotten, how you were only visiting the same 8 websites. There was Reddit, and there was like some social medias, and then there was Google, and maybe some e-commerce. And I remember like back 10 years earlier where there was so much more blogs, and there was forums, and there was like interesting content. But I couldn't find that anymore. And I wanted to find out how much of that was still around. So this is really the origins for the search engine. I built like a search engine crawler that only looked for old websites. And I found a ton of interesting content that way. And I couldn't really search the content, but at that point I just had a long list of links. And the quality of these links was like much higher than what I found on a lot of other places. And they were like interesting and personal and so on, like all the sort of stuff I felt had gone missing. So since I had this process that was finding all these links, I decided maybe I could actually build a search engine around this, and did some like back of a napkin sketches to figure out like what do I need in terms of hardware. And it turned out that it seemed like I would only need like a couple of terabytes of storage and not a lot of processing. So actually I had a small cluster of Raspberry Pis back then. And in my hubris, I tried to build a search engine on Raspberry Pis. And this is going to be a bit of a spoiler, but it turns out you can't actually run a search engine on Raspberry Pis. I managed to index like 100,000 documents or something like 200,000 maybe on Raspberries. which is, well, it's a large amount, but it's a small amount at the same time. And this was just a really back a bunch of ad hoc processes I had built that came together as a really bad search engine. It didn't really respect your query very well, but it returned interesting result regardless of what you typed into it.
Okay.
Wait. So eventually,
what does the word itself mean? Is it an English word?
Yes, Marginalia it means basically margin notes, or like doodles in the book.
Margin notes makes sense.
Yes, I think it's at least sort of an English word. It might be a Latin word as well. I don't know, but it's a loan word at least.
Okay.
Yes.
So like you are back in quarantine and you're just browsing the internet and you couldn't find, interesting pages because, back in the old ages, you would find really interesting blogs or pages and stuff like that. So you decided to write a simple search engine back then. And then actually you wrote something to scrape the internet and then you finally tried to convert it into a search engine. Did I get it all right so far?
Yes, that's correct.
All right.
So far.
All right. Wait, what language is it built in?
This is built in Java.
Wow, you are a big Java enthusiast.
It's actually it's a good language for this sort of thing because it's memory safe and fairly easy to use and actually very robust as well. And there's not a lot of like library churn, which you get with a lot of the newer languages where you keep having to migrate stuff all the time. That's really frustrating for me. So it's not a very sexy language, but it's very good if you want to build something interesting to have a boring language, I think, because that keeps the focus on the development and not the language itself or like building cool stuff in terms of code.
Some things that I would like to know is why do you think was the reason that you weren't finding all of those interesting pages while you're, searching up on Google or DuckDuckGo or other search engines?
Right. Well, at that point, at least, I didn't really understand why. And there's two ways you can look at this. Maybe they had just vanished and gone offline for some reason, and that's at least a compelling idea. But I wasn't really happy to accept it like blindly. So I came up with the alternative hypothesis that maybe what had changed was the search engines and social media and like how we use the internet instead. That was somehow promoting other content, or maybe there was more like search engine spam and so on that was displacing this stuff. And this is really one of the reasons I started doing this scraping project to find old websites. So basically answer the question, where had they gone? What was the problem? And I found a bunch of them. So the notion that they had just dropped off the internet, at least to me, is a dead one. Maybe it has changed. Like there's certainly websites that have gotten offline, but not to the degree that a lot of people are thinking it has.
Okay. Okay. So like I have no idea how search engines work. I mean, I have some idea how Google works, but when it comes to Marginalia, I honestly don't know how it indexes pages, how it finds pages and stuff like that. Can you give us, an introduction? An explanatory introduction into Marginalia. Maybe a technical introduction would be great too.
Right. So the first piece, as we've discussed, is a crawler, which is a process that basically goes through a list of links and downloads HTML from the internet. And this is conceptually fairly simple. This is like a graph traversal of the internet, and it's downloading stuff to files and not really doing anything all too much interesting beyond that. It's difficult because you need to deal with a lot of data, and there's a ways of accessing the documents in an order that makes this faster and so on. But in a very broad sense, it's just basically traversing links and online and downloading HTML, and then this HTML in another step gets processed, and basically the text is extracted, and like the main body of the websites are analyzed, keywords are identified, and then this stuff gets saved down to file again.
Okay.
The next step, this is converted to an index. Basically, It's a number of trees on disk where you're able to go from like a keyword to a list of documents, and this is fairly rudimentary in terms of like algorithms and structures. The challenges are with regards to the amount of data. And once you have these indexes on disk, they're actually building a search engine around it is relatively simple. You just take the keywords the user has typed in, and then you go to these trees. You look up the documents containing the keywords, and then you intersect them. And that's the most basic search engine you could build. And then there's algorithms for like identifying how well they're fitting the keywords. You have famous algorithms like TF, IDF, and BM25, which you can look up. That basically relates term frequencies and so on to importance.
All right. If you're basically scraping the internet, do you just Google search these pages, then scrape them, and then build up the rest of the system? Or where do you get started? Where is it scraping them from?
Right. So the system has basically a database of links that it has found on the documents it has downloaded. And this database of links is what it's going through. So when I started this, I just fed it like a dozen interesting websites. Yes, so I basically fed it a bunch of documents, and then it downloaded them. And part of this processing, it's extracting links from the HTML, and then it feeds it back into the database. And then the next time the crawler runs, it visits those links as well.
Okay.
There's a bit more to it, because if you do this without any sort of limits, then you will have like an enormous amount of links, and it's going to be basically impossible to deal with. But so I have some waiting to try to pick the ones that are most likely to be interesting.
Okay. If you're, I guess, saving these pages onto a database, I'm assuming the storage must be super big. Like, how big are we talking for Marginalia?
Actually, that's a good question. I don't have an up-to-date number, but I do know. Actually, let me think a moment. I think it's something like 10 terabytes for the just the HTML, and then maybe 5 more for the index, something like that. But the server I'm on right now, which is like a proper server, and not. I ran this on like PC hardware for a while, but I migrated to a proper server now, and it has like a 90 terabytes of storage. Wow. So it's going to it has a lot of storage, and that's great, because while I was running this on PC hardware, I had I think it was like 20 terabytes, and it had like 4 terabytes hard drives, and they weren't in a RAID configuration, so I had to like manually allocate, hey, these files should go on this disk, but now it's not quite fitting, so I need to move this file to another disk, and so on. And that's not a civilized way to live. So moving to like this new server and getting it all rated up and so on has been a really nice quality of life improvement for me.
Okay, so currently it's at 20 terabytes.
Something like that. I don't want to swear at this, but you know, there's some redundancy as well in terms of the stored data. But it's surprisingly small given how much data it is.
So like, I guess I have just a technical question, but this might sound pretty dumb because I really don't know much about this. But so you're scraping these pages, you're extracting the body section of the HTML pages, and then storing it on your server. The only reason you need to do that is for you to find the keywords and indexes, right? After that, you could just give the user a link, and he can just, the person could just open up the link and browse it. So I really don't understand the need to store the body of texts here.
That's actually a very fair point. The reason I'm actually storing the HTML for as long as I am is in part because I want to be able to do like more processing on it, like on an ad hoc basis. I want to, maybe if I change the algorithm for extracting the keywords, I want to be able to rerun it and not like wait for a couple of weeks until I can. And I'm also, when I'm fetching these documents, I'm doing conditional requests quite a lot. So I'm using the old body in various ways to avoid having to refetch the same link again if it hasn't changed, and that's another part of it.
I tried to use the search engine a few days ago, and I looked up my portfolio site, and for some reason it didn't return it. Can you explain why that might happen? And also, is there any way that we can contribute to it so it can, I don't know, find even more websites?
Yes, probably the reason is that it just hasn't found your site yet. The index is relatively small. It's I think a bit over 1 million domains it's indexing. Growing the index is relatively slow, but I have actually on GitHub repository where you can just make a pull request with any domain name you want, and then it's going to index in a couple of weeks time. So just adding new sites is relatively easy. But it's a challenge to grow the set of domains in a way that makes sense, so you aren't like pulling in a bunch of spam domains. So actually, at this point, initially it was very easy to find interesting websites, but at this point, this has slowed down quite a bit, and I'm struggling more with finding the interesting websites. And sometimes, especially websites that don't have a lot of links from other websites, are difficult to find.
Okay, you can understand that very fairly. So I guess in order to get a website listed indexed on the search engine would be either you personally adding a link to Scrape, or somehow one of the already links in your database link to, let's say, my portfolio. Then it will finally get it, right?
Yeah, at some point at least. And there's some additional constraints as well. Right now, I'm only indexing, or at least trying to only index English content. And this is because supporting additional languages is quite a lot of work, and I haven't really done that yet. And I don't want to be like a bad search engine for other languages, because I think that's not very useful.
I understand that part. It's pretty interesting for me. I was so excited to actually talk to you about this, because I really don't know anyone else trying to build a search engine from scratch, which is very fascinating. So once again, I'm very grateful that you decided to be on this podcast. I'm learning so much, and I'm hoping everyone listening to this is also learning incredible stuff from you. So I guess some things I would like to know would be, what are your plans for Marginalia? Are you constantly maintaining it and upgrading it? Tell us, what's the vision? Where are we heading? What's the next milestone? Can you update us on some of these?
Right. So I'm actually working full time on this right now. I've been lucky enough to be given a couple of large donations and grants, so I'm able to do this. Like, I've quit my job like over a year ago, and this is my job now. And in terms of moving forward, I think my immediate goal is to index 1 billion documents, and I'm quite a bit far away from that still, and there's some challenges with finding like 1 billion interesting documents. But it's easy to find 1 billion spam documents, but finding 1 billion interesting documents is the hard part. So yeah, and then there's a lot of improvements everywhere. I'm like always working on it. This last couple of weeks has been like the one exception where I haven't been working on it as intensely as I have, because I've been moving. But basically nonstop.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. I guess another question I kind of have is, why not just scrape from Google? Yeah, that would probably make things faster. Reaching to 1 billion indexed pages would be quite fast if you just indexed from Google, right? So I'm guessing it's, the quality of the websites ranked on Google that's limiting this, right?
Yes. Well, there's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, if I'm dependent on Google, then I don't think that's a good business model, because if I get blocked or something like that, then I'm in a lot of trouble. But I also basically want to build something that's independent of them, and as at least a viable alternative, maybe not a replacement. I think actually Google is doing a very good job of search, but they have some problems, and I think a lot of people in tech they have low opinions of Google because they have a frustrating experience sometimes. But in terms of what they're doing a very good job. They have problems, but their search product is very good.
Okay. So even though this search engine is, it's ranked differently than Google and other search engines, is it accurate? Let's say you indexed 1 billion, web pages, and let's say I'm trying to buy a computer, and I search up Marginalia for, the latest computer and stuff. would it be accurate as it would be on Google search or other search engines?
Well, that's a tricky question. In part of this is because ranking is fairly subjective. There's a lot of, I think everyone has an opinion about given a search query.
Yeah.
Which results should show up first. But I think these opinions vary quite a lot, and it depends on what you were looking for as well. And the same query can have different best results given what your intentions were. Yeah. And that isn't always like encoded in the query. But in terms of how well is the ranking and the query evaluation working, it's better than it has been. And for a lot of queries, it's returning surprisingly good results, but there's still room for improvement there. And I mean, like in general, as I mentioned, it's very subjective, and it's very much like I'm trying to return results with a certain vibe. I don't know how to put it in a better
vibe,
way.
I think it's the right word.
Basically results that are in my mind interesting, or the sort of stuff I want to be reading.
Okay. Well, like you did say that you're a hypertext enthusiast, and most of, I guess, the results that are coming up are similar to that. They're mostly text based, and I guess that's one of the rankings that you're primarily focused on right now.
Yeah, it's one of the factors. There's like I don't know how many dozens, maybe 100 different factors I'm looking at, but the proportion of text to like JavaScript and the images and so on is one of them that's affecting ranking.
Okay. I guess, would you say that your background in math contributed to this? Is math very important in trying to build a search engine?
Well, yes, in a sense, but the thing about building a search engine is that it's a very broad area, and you need a basic understanding in a lot of things. And this is not just like almost every area of computer science. You have like algorithms, and you have operating systems, and you have mathematical modeling, certainly, and you have the network stack and so on. Just dealing with huge amounts of data is another one. So I mean, basically, if you want to be doing this sort of stuff, it's very beneficial to at least be able to learn and find information about a lot of different areas. And I certainly, when I started this, I certainly didn't know as much about it as I do now, because I've been basically working full time on this for at least a year now, and a long time before that as well. And yeah.
Okay. So I guess one of the most interesting things in Marginalia for me was there's this tiny box at the bottom of each result, and it has dots, and it tells, I guess, the user that where the keywords are found from the document. And I thought that was very interesting, honestly speaking. It feels very transparent. Can you tell us more about the reasoning behind this?
Well, I don't know if there's like a lot of reasoning going in behind it, but it's mostly just something I tried, and I liked the outcome. I liked being able to see like where in the documents your keywords are, and it's usually a very good indicator of is this actually a good hit, or is it just a glancing mention? And this is partially a bit of a crutch, because sometimes the ranking isn't very good and you're getting bad results on top, but at least it's very easy to see they're not going to be interesting. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I really like it. I honestly want, I want you to add more sites, and maybe, for us to, I guess, somehow expand it by giving it our own websites or links. I don't know. That would be super great. It'll make, the usability aspect of this pretty, I guess, broad and community sourced. So yeah, that would be great. I think it's wonderful. One thing I would like to emphasize on your search engine would be the ability to use special keywords. So you could just look up, sites with IPs, links, documents, even conditional searches. And the fact that you have implemented all of this is pretty fascinating to me. Like, this doesn't feel like, 4 years of work. It feels a bit more than that. So, I guess well done in trying to do that, I guess. It's pretty fascinating. Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay, so what's the next milestone for Marginalia?
Well, as I mentioned, the main goal I'm working right now is just getting more domains in the search engine and more documents in the search engine. It's been stuck at like 300 million documents for a long while now. And I'm at a bit of a plateau, and getting more quality domains is difficult. But I also there's a lot of stuff I want to improve. I have a public API. You have to sign up to get an API key, because if you just put a public API out, then someone will come and spam it with requests. So I give out API keys to be able to rate limit people to some sane pace. But this is still a bit limited, and I want to expand it and make it more useful. So it's possible to build your own front end or integrate it with something else.
Okay. I can't wait until, you indexed even more pages, and, it's at a state where I can just look up something and I find interesting results. Okay, so there's also an encyclopedia. I'm not exactly sure if it's custom or not. Can you tell us about that?
Right. So this was another project I had going, and a couple of years ago, I was frustrated with how distracting the web was. There was images everywhere, and animations and ads and stuff moving around the text. So I really wanted to. I mean, it's really hard to read a text when you have
True. I mean, I'm
video ads in the middle of the.
Just going through your websites, I couldn't find any images. I really tried, but there aren't a lot. I mean, I'm actually even surprised that you have icons in there.
Yeah, they're emojis. So
yeah,
they're
they're actually emoji. I think there's this folder. I think it's called Meme X. I thought it was memes, so I opened it up expecting images, but no. there are just a bunch of text files.
yeah. But going back to the frustration that was behind the Encyclopedia, I really wanted to find does it have to be this way? Did we always design stuff this way? So I went back to Microsoft Encarta from '97, which is encyclopedia that's not Wikipedia, but an old school print encyclopedia on CD. And they didn't really have a lot of hyperlinks in their text. There were some hyperlinks, I think, but also mostly a search box. They didn't really inject images in the text as well. And I really like this vibe, and especially compared to Wikipedia, which hadn't done their redesign yet at that point. And I was struck by how many links are on Wikipedia, in the text, everywhere. And this is something that I was struggling to read the text because the blue links kept pulling at my eyes. So I just started skipping around the text. So I wanted to see what if I apply this almost print-like concept from Encarta to Wikipedia. And Wikipedia's content is actually available online. You can download it as a zim file, which is a compressed archive of all their articles. And it's fairly large, but it's possible to process on a desktop computer in a couple of hours. So I built a program that scraped all the text and basically repackaged it using different CSS. And this is the origins of this encyclopedia website I have. It's trying to present Wikipedia as though it was a printed book, more or less.
Okay. So you went to Wikipedia and scraped the links there and tried to present them in a very comfortable way to, right?
Well, I didn't actually scrape Wikipedia. You can go download all their an archive all their stuff. It turns out if you try to scrape Wikipedia, they will block your IP very quickly. So So
I feel there was this offline version of Wikipedia or something. Maybe I was thinking that version. So it's also not that.
No, but I think it's similar. I think their archive is meant for offline use.
Okay.
But it's a very good resource if anyone is into language processing and that sort of stuff to play with, because you can just do a lot of interesting stuff with that Wikipedia archive.
Okay. So going through your projects and your work, there are a lot of, I guess, search-related things that you're building. There's also the Marginalia similar website finder that you're building. I guess, can you tell us a bit about that?
Right. This has actually been. I should remove that because it's been integrated into the search engine now. But
Okay.
I think people aren't really finding it. If you go to under a search result, there's like an info link, and then you can get information about that website, maybe their RSS feed and a bunch of similar domains. But people are finding that they're finding the similar website finder though, which is basically the same thing that's feeding this site information stuff, but it's presented in a really crude way. And it's I'm basically looking at the similarity of the inbound and outbound links between websites and finding ones that have similar links going to them and from them. That's sort of the gist of the similar website finder, and it has some problems. There's a lot of dead links there and so on, but it's interesting. It's a very good rabbit hole generator where you can like find a bunch of interesting stuff.
This is awesome. Honestly, this is so cool. It's such a, like a technically interesting thing built. And I bet you're having so much fun building this. So like Marginalia, the search engine, is open source. And I'm guessing you contributed like 1.8 million lines of code, which is insane, first of all. I guess even the
Is
next
it really?
yeah, it says 1.8 million lines of code are added, and
Yeah.
1.4 million are the next best lines of the count is 342. It's so interesting. Tell us.
I think it's exaggerating, but maybe that's yeah. But I mean, I'm coding at this project for like every day almost.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. This is probably one of the biggest open sources I know. Tell us about your experience, though. Maintaining this project, working with other people, open sourcing it, managing it, and all of that. Trying to get people to invest in it and get cash, and so all of that. Can you tell us that aspect of maintaining this project?
Well, it's mostly been a solo project, to be honest. I have some contributors coming in and supplying some small patches, but most of the development has been all me. I think it's probably a bit hard to get into, and like the open source Java community is relatively small as well, and fairly like corporation centered. You have a lot of like Apache projects, and there's not a lot of this type of project in Java, and that's a bit of a challenge when it comes to like getting more contributors, I think. But yeah, and I don't know how much there is to say about this. The project has generated a lot of publicity, and that has generated a lot of attention and like donation leads that have sort of just showed up by themselves. It's really sort of taken a life on its own. It wasn't really intended to become as big as it has, but now somehow I've been given all this money and been able to do this full time as like a job. It doesn't really feel like a job. It feels like I'm just having fun all the time. And then there's actually something to be said. I mean, a lot of people, I think they're building interesting stuff, but they aren't really talking about it enough, and then doesn't get noticed. If you have this like almost fuel to air ratio of doing stuff and talking about it, where if you hit it, then you will probably get attention and publicity, and you will be talking in podcasts and that sort of stuff, and people will start throwing money at you. It took a long time to actually discover this, but once you're in sort of that zone, it really becomes self-propelling somehow.
Okay. I guess since you're like a big Java person, what do you think about other languages? Rust, Swift, Go, and all of these quote unquote latest languages. They're efficient, memory safe, and type safe and all of that.
Well, I don't know. I have tried to learn a few of them. I haven't really gotten into it, and I'm not really only a Java programmer either. I've been doing, as I mentioned earlier, C++ and a bunch of other languages. But I really dislike languages that don't have like a stable set of libraries where stuff keeps churning. That's a huge frustration for me when I always have to be updating stuff and stuff is breaking and I need to change stuff rather than keep developing. And there's always like this. There's almost like a law of nature of the longer a programming language has been around, the longer it will stay around as well. And I think the languages you list, them, they will probably stay around because they have been around for at least a couple of years. But the momentum of a language like Java or PHP or C++, it's really hard to overstate how important that is, and like having a huge library of existing code to draw from as well. That's a very important asset, I think. But that makes actually dislodging these languages very hard. Like even if you look at like language popularity graphs these days, like PHP is still huge. I can't understand why it is huge, but it is, and it's probably just this momentum.
Okay. I understand. I guess the reason I asked you is because honestly, I don't know a lot of Java devs from, I guess, my community here or anyone I've been talking to during this podcast or over on Twitter as well. I don't know a lot of trending Java projects as well. So yeah, I found this to be very interesting, even in the technical terms as well. So yeah. Kudos to you, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, it is a very unsexy language. It's really corporate and boring.
Yes,
and
it's very corporate. It's one of those languages you learn in university, I guess. That's my first encounter of it, I guess.
Yeah, but it turns out if you actually know what you're doing, it can be really performant, and you can do a lot of stuff with it. But a lot of Java code isn't very good, and it isn't very fast, and people, I think they associate that with the language, this sort of copy-paste mentality where you go to Stack Overflow and just have a solution and you paste it into your code, and it isn't like even indented properly, and you just ship it. But I don't think that's fair to the language. And especially recently, it's been evolving quite a lot as well. Like there's releases every year, and they're adding new features to it and so on. So it's changed a lot. Like a lot of people they saw it a couple of years ago or like 5 years ago. It's not even the same language anymore.
Okay, so I guess this project being Java, one of my concerns is that, since most people working on open source don't really use Java, it might be a bit of a hindering issue for them to jump on this project and contribute, even though they have good ideas and all of that. I guess maybe are you open to a fork of this project in a different language? Maybe if there are other people that are incredibly interested in this, are you open for them to transition this Java-based source code into a different language?
I'm a bit skeptical of the idea, mostly because these porting efforts, they tend to take forever, and then they don't usually end up very good. But I mean, there's possible ways of contributing to the project, even though you don't know Java. For the one hand, there's a lot of front end stuff that I'm not really a front end guy, and you can tell when you visit my websites. I'm very much a back end guy. So there's a lot of big work that could be done on the front end. But there's also
But then again, you really don't like graphics and images and videos. So to you, this probably looks amazing.
Well, in one way, yes, but I mean, if I want the project to succeed, I'm open to the notion that maybe there needs to be another front end that's a bit more modern. I don't know. There's also the system actually makes down calls to C++ code, so it's possible to integrate Java with other languages, especially when it comes to the low-level index bits. That's another quite viable way, I think, of taking the project if there's a lot of people coming in saying, hey, why can't you do this in C++ or Rust or something like that? Because one of the weakest points of the language is low-level programming. It's possible, it's reasonably performant, but it's really awkward still. It was even more awkward a couple of years ago. It's gotten better, but it's still just having C++ style pointers would help so much.
Okay. While you're working on this project, what was the most difficult part for you? Maybe to this day.
That's a very good question. There's a lot of really finicky bits in the index construction and so on. I don't know if I have a good example of one, but actually getting that to work and getting it to work well it's really hard because you basically have to implement a lot of data structures on disk implicitly. So I mean, if you're coding a language like C or C++, you would have pointers and references to objects and so on. Here you're doing the same stuff without a language. You're just allocating stuff in a file and keeping track of their location and so on. And getting that correctly it's very finicky. So there's some parts of the code where I'm like, I don't want to maintain this. This is I need to rewrite this because it's so finicky.
Oh, I totally understand that.
just getting it slightly wrong, the entire index is unreadable, and yeah, it's a real pain in the ass.
Okay. Honestly, I'm also a big fan of the hypertext styled and themed websites and projects. So I really hope that this remains this way. I'm sure there are a bunch of other people who feel the same way. I think one of the most, it would make things easier having no graphics, images and videos would make this such a comfortable way to, and a very distracting way of browsing the internet, discovering new sites, and just, focusing on the content right there. So yeah, I really hope you continue this. Don't see it as a bad thing, I guess.
Actually, my website for a long while, it was co-published on a protocol called Gemini.
Really?
Which is, it is basically a very stripped down version of HTTP. You can imagine it. It doesn't really have.
I've read you did. I think you wrote some about, or it's in one of your projects.
Yeah, and it only, you can only make basically GET requests, and you're only permitted to serve, or like by convention, you're serving a language called GemText, which is a stripped down version of Markdown. So you have no images, you have no inline links, no nothing. And this has really sort of shaped my website, and this exposure to Gemini was an interesting time in my life. I've sort of moved away from it because co-publishing on two different languages was a bit of a pain. But if anyone like you is feeling like this text-only web is an interesting place, you should look into Gemini, because there's a lot of people in there doing interesting stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I'm growing to love these minimalistic designs and simple text-based interfaces. For some reason, I used to hate it before, but now, I guess as I grow older, I find it less distracting, less attention-seeking, and it lets me focus. And yeah, it's really good. All right, let's talk about AI, I guess. So in one of the articles, blog posts that you wrote, you say that, large language models are a threat to the conventional search engines because the modern web is unbelievably annoying and a dumpster fire. That is quoted directly from what you wrote. Can you tell us a bit more why you said all of this?
Yes, I think my basic hypothesis is that, well, if you're using something like ChatGPT, you're only getting a text answer. You're not getting ads. You're not getting animations or distractions. You're only getting what you came for. And this is at least in part of why it feels so good to use AI compared to if you presented the same answer on a website that looks like it's in the top 5 links on Google. You have all these ads, and you have these cookie notifications that you need to accept, and you have subscribe to my newsletter and all this stuff popping up while you're reading, and the layout shifts as you read and so on. It wouldn't feel as good. It wouldn't feel as relevant. You would skip most of it. You would be annoyed and you would leave and be frustrated, right? So I think a big part of why at least the question answering aspect of search engines is being threatened by AI is that the web is really bad at answering questions these days, because the answer you're getting, they're stupidly annoying.
Okay. You wrote a lot of articles, and it's very fascinating to actually go through them and read through your blog posts. Tell us why you write.
Well, it's almost like a compulsion. I need to write to get stuff out of my head, and it's a very good habit for like developing ideas. Because if you have an idea in your head, it will spin around, but it won't really mature. But if you write your idea down, then you will be able to engage with it in a written form, and then maybe as you edit your writing, then you will come up with additional nuances or counter arguments or whatever. But I find it's very helpful for developing your thinking and really sort of an outlet for a lot of stuff I have in my head.
That's good. That's good. It's just fascinating because some of the posts and the blog posts that you wrote are very random. So there's this piece called The Enigmatic Jacket, where you just dissect a picture of a jacket and you zoom in and analyze the hands and a bunch of other things. And I thought that was pretty fun to read.
Yeah, I think this was some ad I saw on Twitter or something like that of a jacket that was clearly like AI generated, but like with old AI, so it was bad. So you had like shadows that didn't line up.
Yeah.
The jacket didn't have a hand in it, but there was a shadow of a hand behind the arm. It really stuck with me, this bizarre image.
All right. There's also another post about boats, and boats are everywhere nowadays. And what do you think about boats? What would be the best way to prevent them? And is it possible for boats to exist on the search engine that you're using? Maybe to scrape them, or pretend like, I don't know, boats, whatever boats do. Tell us a bit more about that.
Right. So I think like in general, the internet is in a really rough state right now when it comes to bots, because they're basically impossible to detect. And the only viable way of blocking them is to use something like Cloudflare, which is basically putting a man in the middle between your website and the users. And there's a lot of misbehaved bots that are making requests at a ridiculous rate, and they're on botnets, so you can't like block them via IP. So the web is in a really rough state, and it's pushing all these bad changes on websites where you have to go through like proving that you're a human all the time and so on. I don't know if there's a good solution to this. It's just a wild west, basically. What I do with my search engine is I have an enormous amount of overcapacity, so I can actually deal with the bot requests, even though like I think like 2% of the requests I get are for human beings, the rest are from bots. And even then I have a public API you can use, but people are still using bots and basically making requests regardless. So, yeah.
Okay, there's also another section, I guess, about moral philosophy and all of that. And I forgot to ask you earlier on, are you in any way, spiritual or religious? Tell us about that parts of your life.
Yes, that is an interesting question. I don't really identify myself as an atheist, but I don't think I'm like traditionally religious either. I don't know exactly what I think. I like trying on different perspectives and worldviews and seeing like how they change your experiences as a human being, and as a result I've had a lot of experiences and points of view that don't really align. I have a lot of conflicting perspectives, so I'm at a point where I'm not really sure what I believe in anymore.
Were you, I don't know, what kind of household were you?
Well, I think I would probably describe it as mostly secular, but there's some like Christian influences from especially my mother's side and my grandmother's side. But this is mostly secular, and especially going through like studies at university, you're really steeped in this philosophy of logical positivism that only what can be experimentally proven is meaningful. But later in life, I've begun to push back against that. Because I really got really into philosophy and sort of gained tools to engage with these ideas that I didn't have when I was studying, and basically came to a point where like, well, what do you mean meaningful? There's a lot of human experiences that aren't really measurable, but they're very meaningful to me. So
that's actually pretty interesting.
You being a physicist, and I mean, I would expect you to battle with the idea of belief and Christianity and God and religion and all of that. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, to be honest, that you. Go ahead.
There's a surprising number of like religious or spiritual physicists out there, especially among like the most successful ones. So I think there's this conflict between religion and physics that exists, especially in discussions online and so on, that doesn't really exist among the people who practice physics.
That's interesting. Okay, so like, would you label yourself as a skepticism or something?
Yes, in the philosophical sense, but not in the. I think a lot of people they have this sort of half skepticism. They're skeptical toward everything they don't believe in, but they aren't skeptical in the stuff they believe in. It's very easy to be skeptical toward stuff you don't believe in, of course.
True.
But the trick is to also not like, because I can't prove this, it's false. That's not being a skeptic. That's just being very opinionated. Being a true skeptic means your default point of view is I don't know, I don't understand, and until something can be proven, which I'm not sure if it can be proven, I'm still not certain. And this is also the basis of science as well. And anyone who says that science can't prove this, therefore it's wrong, they don't understand science. So being comfortable in this position of not being certain and finding some sort of peace in that, I think that's actually being a skeptic. And I'm closer to that position than the people who call themselves skeptics. I've been reading a lot of Plato and so on, and he pushes a lot of these ideas, and it's really been resonating with me.
Wow, okay.
I was on a bit of a philosophy bender a while back. I don't think would call myself a philosopher, but I'm especially these like older philosophers. They really appeal to me. I feel like they talk in a way that makes sense, even though they aren't always correct about everything.
I guess I personally, I'm like a believer. I'm a Christian, and I've had my phase where I'm like, who is God, and is he real? Do I have any connections with this God guy? And I mean, I would invite you to read more about Christian values and all of that, because I think it's the most sensible and most coherent piece of evidence for the existence of God. Maybe you might find that pretty interesting, because a lot of people who love Plato are Christians, and maybe you might find that.
Yeah, there's a lot of Plato in Christianity, because it's basically the marriage of Greek philosophy and the Jewish religion, as it was back in the day. But I have a very bizarre hobby. I'm actually into church history.
Oh, really? That's fascinating.
Yeah. Really, but this is more like stamp collecting than like something I practice.
Okay.
Because there's this really interesting story of how the Christian church has evolved, branched, and ended up in different places with different notions about things. And I'm very excited to learn about, okay, these guys have these ideas about the Trinity, and these guys think differently, and this guy was branded a heretic, and so on. And this is endlessly fascinating to me. I don't really know why this is so fascinating, as I'm not really a practicing Christian, but I like the idea of this institution that has remained mostly the same for a long time. It's really sort of tying the people of the present to the people of the past, which I think people now are missing, like a sense of history. Where did we come from? What is this society we're living in? Like, I think people in modernity, they don't really have that connection anymore. They're just living now, always now. And I think that's a loss. I think that means we're kind of wondering and rediscovering like basic stuff about being a human again that we shouldn't be rediscovering. We should be knowing them already, because people have figured this stuff out for a long time ago.
That's fascinating. I guess in my opinion, there are like two groups of people. So there are people who start off saying, okay, God exists and he is true and he is loving and caring. And they build every other case around that. They build their worldviews around that. The church histories are there to support, this claim. So like you start with the general idea that he's actually, true and exists and all of that. And then you build out everything else. And there are other people. I feel like you belong to this group of people where they start at the edge of things. Church history, theology, questions, and a bunch of, contrasting and comparison and all of that. So they start at the branch and they try to get to the root of things, which is very fascinating to me because I belong to the first group of people, but like you being the second group is very fascinating because honestly, it takes more work, I would say, than the first group of people because, you have to check out the evidence even more. You have to dig deeper. Maybe the branch you're on is maybe on a different tree, Maybe you'll have to jump on a different tree to get back to, the God that you're trying to understand, I guess. So yeah, it's very fascinating that you're this kind of person. I hope, your journey to seek the truth and, understand all of these is complete and beautiful for you. And I hope to have you on my session another time where, your search engine is like super big and you've answered some of your questions you have. So yeah, this is very fast. I guess on my side of things, I have finished all the questions I have written down. If there is anything that you would like to ask me, that you'd like to know about the community here or the podcasts or anything about me personally, feel free to ask and we can talk about all of those things that you want to, mention.
Yeah, I don't know if I actually have a good question, but I'm really excited that there's like tech scenes popping up in Africa because especially like at the point you seem to be right now, because that's such a good time in the evolution of a tech scene to be in it when it's just starting up and interesting stuff is happening. So I'm really happy for that.
Thank you. That really means a lot. Have you, ever been in the African continent? I'm particularly in Ethiopia on the east side of Africa. Have you ever been near here or here?
I have not. I'm actually not that big of a traveler. I've only been like a couple of countries in Europe, but nothing more than that. So I actually have not.
Okay. As an outro, what is, one of the biggest lessons life has taught you, being a coder, an open source maintainer, a search engine dev? What has that taught you? So what would you advise, me, a 24-year-old person, which is like almost exactly 10 years younger than you? What would you advise me, which indirectly advises everyone in my community?
Well, I think something I've arrived at is that you don't really need anyone's permission to build something. And this is especially with regards to something like a search engine. It feels like you should require to be like a huge company and have a lot of money to start working on it, or just something ambitious. It turns out you don't actually need that. You don't need a license. You don't need permission. You don't even really need to know how to build everything when you start out. You can just start small and keep going. And maybe it fails. Maybe you learn something along the way. Maybe it doesn't, and maybe it spirals out of control and it's your whole life. Who knows? But you don't need permission for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. I think that is the end of our session. I would like to thank you so very much for being on the show. You've been such an amazing and very interesting guest to have. Hopefully, we'll see you on another episode in the future. I wish you all the good things in life. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Have a beautiful time. And that is it, everyone. I'll see you on the next session. Goodbye.